Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to all of you and thank you for joining this gathering. A big thank you also to our co-organizing partners, the Permanent Missions of Austria, Ecuador and Slovenia, the MacArthur Foundation and UNIDO, as well as our distinguished speakers who made time available to share with us their experience and expertise on the role of industry in circular cities. Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as a specialized agency of the United Nations mandated with industrial development, and as we like to emphasize, inclusive and sustainable industrial development, the theme of today's gathering is at the core of what we do. This is why when we learned of the Danish Clean Tech Hub initiative to organize a full week of circular economy events, the Circular City Week New York, we took this opportunity to provide a platform for member states and the interested public, many of whom are here today. Thank you for coming. And invite experts to share their experiences on different aspects of implementing circular economy policies, harnessing new technologies, and adopting innovative business models. As the global community continually progresses towards addressing the threats of climate change, our industries too need to be on more environmentally sustainable modes of production and be more efficient in the use of resources. Waste is a resource. It contains valuable materials that could be used again and again. Where that is no longer possible, embedded energy can often be extracted for further power production and heating. Sorry. Mr. Ambassador, please. Thank you. All this is significantly cutting down on pollution and improving the health and well-being of people. UNIDO supports waste management programs in regions and countries. Through these, firms build capacities to extract potential secondary raw materials from waste and detoxify them to enable reuse and remanufacturing. His Excellency, the Ambassador of Ecuador, who joined us, welcome, will provide more interesting insights into this aspect of e-waste in a short while. Implementing circular economy principles and developing sustainable waste management programs also show promise for job creation in waste collection and sorting and processing through recycling. A recent study by Accenture estimates that manufacturers can tap into a $4.5 trillion of global market opportunities by transitioning to a circular economy, and ILO estimates that 6 million jobs can be created. But, as we all know, circular economy is so much more than merely waste management. Hence, UNIDO supports member countries to remove toxins at the beginning of a product's life cycle by upgrading design, product, and production technologies. This often links with meeting the commitments under the multilateral environmental agreements. As cities grow, industries that were at the outskirts of a city find themselves in residential areas where air and noise pollution are no longer acceptable. Municipalities are forced to act, keeping the interests of residents and industries as job providers in balance. We will hear today expert views on how this can best be done. At UNIDO, we get many requests from member countries across the world to support the transformation of industries into eco-industrial parks as one possible option to address the issue of industries in an urban setting. This means putting in place circular business practices such as industrial symbiosis, both within these parks and with the urban environments they are located in. Within the UN, circular economy is a concept that gets traction and that is considered as one of the possible pathways to meet climate change challenges, to implement the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. Last year, in October, the Second Committee of the General Assembly and the ECOSOC jointly organized a first meeting on circular economy. The interest by member states and the value in promoting this concept has once again brought us here together. On behalf of all the co-organizers, I welcome you once again and invite you all to exchange your experiences, plans, visions in support of facilitating a smoother pathway towards your country's version of a circular economy. Thank you. And with these words, I would like to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Luis Gallegos Chiriboga, Permanent Representative of Ecuador to the UN, for his opening remarks. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Her Excellency Ms. Tarja Buga Kuret, I hope I said this approximately good, Permanent Representative of Slovenia, Ms. Claudia Linke-Hep, Officer in Charge and Deputy Representative of UNIDO, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I extend my appreciation to the permanent missions of Austria and Slovenia, to the UN, UNIDO, UNIDO, and the MacArthur Foundation for co-sponsoring this important event. Article 415 of our Constitution affirms that the central government and the decentralized autonomous governments, fundamentally the local governments, shall adopt integral and participatory policies for urban development and land use planning. Local governments shall develop programs for rational use of water, reduce, recycle, and adequate treatment of solid and fluid waste. Our National Development Plan 2017-2021 encourage environmentally responsible production and consumption based on circular economy and bioeconomy principles, stimulating recycling and combating programmed obsolescence, and in this regard, aims at strengthening local governments' capabilities to effectively implement systems for prevention of environmental pollution through inter alia programs for integral management for solid waste, river contamination, and water recycling for agricultural production. Approximately 40 years ago, we came to these halls of the United Nations to expound and explain what we believed was a factor of climate deterioration. We were the first environmentalists who came to these halls and talked about forests and rivers and fish and indigenous populations and the need to preserve Earth, Mother Earth, as our indigenous populations called it. When we began this allocution of principles, we were really combated by all sectors. They told us that we would condemn our countries to poverty, that there was no such thing as environmental degradation, that there was no such thing as being careful with fish and water and the rest. And what we were saying would ultimately impact people was not believed. I think that 40 years later, it has taken practically 2 generations for the world to change, because there's no company in the world that does not want to be perceived as green. But this has been a change in international society. The children had taught their parents. It was not laws alone, and it was not treaties negotiated in these halls alone that managed to change the perception of the world to a more familiar and friendly planet in which we need to recycle and have a circular economy. As coming from an agricultural country, we knew this from the beginning. If you plant a tree, the tree will grow. If you take care of it and give it water and give it nourishment, you will be able to get the fruit, and then the tree will maintain itself. It will give you oxygen, and it will also give you food, and you should be careful of the earth. That, unfortunately, we have not done in the industrialized world. Therefore, it is an important subject matter how we do in this new circular economy we are expounding. Among the initiatives in which the leading role of the Ministry of Environment and through the support of the Global Environmental Facility and UNIDO, our implementing agency under the project Strengthening of National Initiatives and Enhancement of Regional Cooperation for Environmentally Sound Management of Persistent Organic Pollutants and Waste of Electronic and Electrical Equipment in Latin American countries, a technical workshop was organized on March 2018 with a view to launch a program for the proper disposal and recycling of electronic waste in 13 Latin American countries facing similar interregional challenges through the circular economy approach. To this project, technical support on methodologies to establish waste sorting and differentiated collection was provided to more than 50 local governments in Ecuador. As a result, many local governments have been able to continue with these practices and expand these practices. Additionally, activities have been focused on certain recycling areas, such as the use of tires, scraps, recycling and traditional materials, paper, cardboards, plastic, metals, by base recyclers, which represent a large number of direct workers related to the areas and reaches of recycling rates between 10 to 20%. I believe we are in the right direction, and I congratulate the organizers again of this event, because I think it of the utmost importance that we begin and continue to talk about the new methodologies that we can use around the world in this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Mr. Ambassador. And I would like to give the floor to Ms. Miranda Schnittke to set the stage and give us a presentation. Ms. Schnittke works for the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Sorry, I lost the line in here. You are the City Projects Lead at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. I got it right now. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for coming. Thank you very much for those opening words, setting the scene and also taking us a bit through the history of where this has come from. Circular economy isn't a brand new concept. It's been around for a while. It's also strong in certain philosophies, very strong in China, for example. But actually converting this mindset into the way that our economy works is beginning, and I'll talk very positively about some of the examples we've seen, but there's also a very long way to go, and it will take all of us to really change the system. So hold on to that mindset shift as I talk about this, because that's what we need to do to get there. So I'm just going to use a couple of slides to bring a bit of color to what I say. Kicking off with just pictures of cities that mean something to me personally, because they're the ones I've lived in. And those of you who heard me speak yesterday have seen this slide already. I haven't lived in New York, but I'm here in New York, so I threw a picture in. What we did right at the start of this project is we looked at city plans around the world. So we picked at least 5 to 10 on every continent to try and draw out what were the consistent themes. And actually it was pretty, there are many themes, of course, because everything happens in cities and it's very complex. But what was consistently the case was a concern and a focus on housing, concern and focus on transport. I did a very amateur poll of a group of our network in terms of positive words they associated with cities and negative words, and the positive is creative and innovative and dynamic, which is great and sets us up well for trying to change a system, but the negatives very quickly come down to congestion, pollution, not being able to get to places, things getting expensive, and you can see that reflected in city priorities. The other thing that was interesting was continued importance on growth, but also using a range of adjectives in front of the word growth, very good, be it better, be it positive, not necessarily spelling out quite yet what that means, but I think it's a telltale sign of the fact that people know that the current system has brought us economic development, but has also brought us quite a lot of challenges that we need to address. So that was where we started, and that moved us on to looking at like some of the three fundamental systems that occur in cities. There are other things too. I'm not going to touch on food today, although we do have a project on food in cities that's recently been released as well. I'm going to focus on the opportunities in buildings, because that is fundamental. If you imagine a city, you will imagine buildings. Mobility, because that's what we need to get around, and products, because that is also what we are consuming a lot of the time. And actually the challenges for cities are great. 75% of municipal solid waste comes from consumer goods, and at the moment, because of the way they're designed, because of the way the system is set up, a lot of that ends up being burnt or landfilled rather than any of the valuable materials that have been talked about already being picked out. And also it leads up to 20% of municipal budgets being spent on waste management, which in all honesty is not really where we want that percentage of money to be spent. Ideally, it would be spent on education or the housing or so on and so forth. So if we could shift the system, that would be a double win. So those were some of the reasons for change. So at that point, we thought, well, what if we apply circular economy principles to cities? So there's a very basic recap, but what if we design out waste and pollution? What if we keep the products in our cities in use at value? And what if we also have a system that allows nature and natural systems within cities to regenerate? So cutting their pollution out again. You can see it's all very circular. And the benefits, broadly, you will always hear people say economic, social, and environmental, and I do think that's true. We broke it down a little bit more to get slightly more granular, and actually these 5 areas in terms of health and environment, if you have a better environment, you're also going to have better health, which is also going to save the city and government's costs. Economic productivity, job skills and innovation, that's what we want to have, each one of us, to have the ability to create something, contribute, to have community, and to use our resources better. If I link back to, if I go to the next slide, relating that back to that list, actually those benefit areas are exactly the things that were coming out of the plans that we saw in cities. The only one, interestingly, that's not so strongly on there specifically is resource use. It's not currently like it's not written into city plans at the moment that we want to change our resource use, but there is you can sort of see the connection there in terms of want to develop stronger resilience, want to be able to manage with climate changes and so on and so forth. So to dive into what emerged from our work on what city governments could do, this does also apply to other tiers of government, and there is no one uniform city with one uniform set of policy levers. It does vary according to national constellations. But actually there's quite a wide range of things that can happen in policy in order to incentivize the change. It's definitely been noted already that industry has a huge role to play in this, but it will also take policy, and it will also take us as individuals. So it will take the village to change the system. So the other thing that we also noticed was it's very rare that one policy only touches on one thing. So public procurement can be reinforced by having a vision that already plans and indicates what needs to change. Urban planning and asset management go very strongly together. Legislation typically reinforces many of the other levers. So they're not isolated things. They're often used in partnerships, and that's what that interesting looking bell on the side of the screen is sort of trying to represent in terms of the connections to these things. And from having identified the various policy levers that can be used in order to support circular economy transitions, we also looked at a very, very simple framework as to how to apply that to the world out there. This is a picture of Singapore, which I thought was an interesting juxtaposition between incredible urban planning and the development of a green oasis, and then in the background you can see the heavy industry and all the ships waiting to bring in all the goods. But if thinking about, because you do need to, it can be quite overwhelming, even talking to the cities that we work with, like how on earth do I start applying this? So sort of thinking very simply in terms of what are the opportunities at the planning stage, right? Before we've even started using the materials, what are the opportunities at the design stage? And that is a really big one with industry, if they can design the products from the very beginning so that there you can take them apart. You know that the products that you've used, when they're no longer needed, are actually an input for the next item, knowing who those partnerships are and who you can work with. How you make them, obviously the design is great, but then also if you stick everything together with glue that's never going to allow you to take it apart again, that's going to be a problem. So how you make things is important. How you access things, this links really strongly to business models. I'll touch on a few cases in a minute before I finish, but there are businesses experimenting with various different ways of offering goods these days, including not necessarily selling things outright, but leasing them. So it's more you're in a contract with the businesses, and the advantage of that is, obviously, if you structure it correctly, then those people who actually put the product together, who have the knowledge about the materials, retain the ownership and have an incentive for them to last as long as possible. Plus, when they need repair, they can do. Whereas I, at home, when my microwave is broken, honestly, I don't even know if I have the right screwdriver. So accessing it in a different way and also operating and maintaining, making that easier too. So I'll just whiz through a couple of cases and then I'll flag where you can find out more information, but then also we'll open it up a bit. So material flow analysis is a really important part of identifying where the opportunities are. It's 3 words, easy to say, quite difficult to map out. This diagram here is from our New Plastics Economy initiative, so identifying the amount of plastic that goes in, how much of that plastic is then recaptured, how much is recycled, burnt, landfilled, or simply leaks out into the ocean. Doing analysis like this on specific material streams, but also applying that to a specific city, is being used by quite a lot of cities around the world. And in fact, it's appropriate to say that, given we're in the UN building, UN Environment is doing quite a lot of work with cities on this as well, including some of those cities I highlighted there. And that is really about vision, engagement, and awareness raising. And the engagement is really important too, because I don't think any city or any government would necessarily have all the answers just from looking at the data themselves. You would have to work with the industry to identify this. To flick to another example, it's still niche, it's still small, but there is a beautiful movement of makers who are capturing the benefits of the digital age. An example is OpenDesk, who are a furniture design company in London. And you can go onto their website, you can order a desk, customize it, and then say you've ordered it from here in New York, you will not have that desk shipped to you. Instead, you will receive a CAD file, and then the OpenDesk have mapped out who in New York, close to me, has a CNC machine, and I can take my CAD file to that local office, and they can print it for me. So I've cut out the shipping costs. They've also opened up local job opportunities and reintroduced an element of making in cities. So that's one example of a sort of movement that's happening. Another one I'll flag is Materium, who, if you go back to the previous slide, Materium are experimenting with putting together an open source recipe manual, which is sourced from people all over the world in terms of local materials that are available, how they could put together so that you could make from locally available material, including things that are currently in the waste stream, recapturing them as resources and making locally rather than necessarily always having to import all the materials from elsewhere. So that, I think, is a really exciting movement, and the people that are involved in it, because it's open source and enabled by digital, it can happen across the world. Like with the first example, they're based in London, but the actual manufacture happens left, right, and center. I'm going to touch on at the other end of the scale. So this is in Brazil. They have e-waste is a very high portion of the waste stream in Brazil. Belo Horizonte has worked with a national scheme in partnership, and they are using circular economy principles to address 3 issues. One, to drive down electrical waste and remanufacture computers. And then with that, offer skills training for people who are out of a job. And then use those remanufactured computers in order to enable digital inclusion. So put those computers back on the market, procure them themselves as well, and then address those 3 things. So e-waste, skills training, and digital inclusion, all in the one initiative. The next example, and this is my last one, this is on a bigger scale. So Buenos Aires, the street lighting, fundamental part of any city, core to our safety, core to mobility systems. they have partnered with Philips and procured a system in which they've switched all the streetlights to LED, which already increases the life of each lamp. But also in a system where Philips retains ownership, and therefore they are incentivized to make sure that each light works for as long as possible. The city is mostly interested in just the provision of light. It doesn't really care about the light bulbs individually. It just needs to make sure that people are safe and can get around. So that's an example of where you've changed the business model. The incentives are right for both parties. And the overall system, because of also digital enablement, can also predict where the maintenance is necessary, so you can plan that in much more effectively. So it's also an awareness and a knowledge of where your assets are. So there's 4 examples. There are plenty of others out there. I'll just plug that we, on yesterday, in fact, released a online website full of resources, which you are more than welcome to visit and download from. It's broken into 5 modules. We've got a module on setting out a very short vision for what it could look like, fact sheets that give you a wealth of case for change information, examples of where things are taking place, and examples of what some of the benefits are, drawing from our own studies, drawing from studies from the UN, OECD, C40, around the world, basically. The policy levers, so the diagrams you saw earlier, slightly more explained and then supported by examples in cities. And then some deep dive case studies about how this is done, also getting into a bit like the cultural aspects of needing to work across departments, breaking traditional silos, and so on and so forth. And then lastly, it is not just Ellen MacArthur or people on the panel today. There are quite a lot of organizations out there who are trying to enable circular economy. So we've given links to the resources that they have too. So I do encourage you to go there and spend some time finding things and also go back to it. I would consider it a reference library, effectively, and give us your feedback too. So that is a whistle-stop tour of a couple of things. I've probably spoken for far too long. I'm going to hand over to whoever's next.
Thank you, Miranda. Could have listened much more. It's very interesting. Thanks a lot, and I love the examples. Really great, I think. A great setting the scene. Thank you very much. And with this, let me introduce the panel, which will be moderated by Michael at the far end. Michael Chang is the Communications Director of Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance. And before I hand over the floor to you, Michael, I would like to introduce the other panelists, and this time I tried to get it right the first time. Let me start with Her Excellency, Ms. Bavdaž Kuret, the permanent representative of the Republic of Slovenia to the UN. Welcome. Then Ms. Lindsay Clinton, who is the Senior Vice President of the New York City Economic Development Corporation. Ms. Ditte Liesgaard-Wind is the managing partner of Lendeger Group. And last but not least, no, you're not the only gentleman on the panel. Michael is the moderator, so as a panelist, you're the only gentleman. Mr. Brian Mataszewski, yes. Did I get it right? Yes, very good. Global Head of Brand Partnerships, TerraCycle Loop. So thank you very much, all of you, for coming. I'm really looking forward to this panel. It's going to be very interesting, and I'll hand over to Michael. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. So I'm very interested in 2 S's in today's conversation. The first one is specifics. Specifics, specifics, specifics. Thank you, Miranda, for starting us off with some specific case studies. If we don't have specifics, it's going to make it very difficult to take away any lessons learned and best practices. So the panel knows this, but I'm just emphasizing at the very beginning that specifics is what we're looking for. And I was also queued up by Claudia to emphasize industry. So whenever I say the word industry, I'll lean into the microphone and say industry. No, she's very interested in the role industry can play in this conversation, so let's focus on industry. But the other S I'm interested in is, as a communicator, storytelling. So I was just in the bathroom prior to coming here, perhaps more information than you wanted to know, but by the waste basket, there was a waste management pilot poster, and it was all about saying yes to less. This is interesting because World Resources Institute just put out a report about how to talk about vegetarianism, for example. And in fact, no surprise, people don't want to hear about meatless or meat-free. They're less inclined to choose a vegetarian diet if it's framed as vegan, vegetarian, meatless, meat-free. Somehow that's constraint, that's limiting. So how do we talk about it? Well, according to the WRI study, Better Buying Lab, it is all about nutrition and health and the bouquet of foods afforded us in the plant-based world. So the bounty, the beauty, the positivity versus the limitations. This is important for the circular economy. How do we talk about it? I'm always interested in how we talk about it to the public. Because the public isn't, probably, using a whole lot of circular economy jargon. So how do we have conversations about this incredible, critical work that all of these panelists are doing in ways that the public and their policymakers, not all of which come from a strong, and well, I'll be careful what I'm about to say, strongly educated background, and even they aren't using circular economy. I'll just speak to my own. I'm a US citizen, so I'll just speak to my own representatives. So how do we find stories that are compelling? Like, what's going to happen to this pen? What's the next life of this pen? What's the next life of this water bottle? What's the next life of this book that she just wrote, which I'll talk about in a minute? What's the next life of this suit? What happens to this suit? How do we engage in conversation? How do we storytell this in a really interesting way and back it up with specifics? Because if we don't have specifics, people are like, oh, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work. Be like, no, 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 it is. Did you just see Miranda's 4 case studies? It's totally going to work. So we have to convince them that it's going to work with specifics, and we got to storytell in a way that's interesting to them. So, a couple quick things, and then we'll jump in. Expected outcomes from this conversation in the next hour plus. The event will. 3 things. I guarantee it. Increase awareness about the relationship between circular industries. And the 4th, industrial revolution. That'll be too much. I won't do it all the time. And 2, share policy tools and experiences on the opportunities and challenges of contributing to job creation in a city-level context. Always easier for a city official to sell it if it creates jobs, no question. And 3, provide a measure for development to ensure that developing countries and economies in transition may benefit from the most, or benefit most, from a global circular economy and 4th industrial revolution. So that's the expected outcome. Guiding questions? I'll mention 3 of them. Because this is how we're going to break down our conversation. We're going to break it into 3 tiers. We're going to have a policy conversation, a tech conversation, and a business conversation. Sorry for the shorthand. So we'll break it into those 3, and then we'll have a Q&A. So have your questions queued up. We'll tee it off with Austria first, but then we'll open it up to everyone else since they're a sponsor of this event. So first guiding question, how to use cutting-edge technology to reduce waste in manufacturing and production while boosting job creation. Again, back to the jobs. 2, what laws and incentives, policies, are put into place to stimulate recycling industries and eliminate waste? And 3, is there a business case for increased resource efficiency? Of course there is. We'll talk about that here. And circular production. And if it is not profitable yet, which it is, what is the time horizon for reaching a break-even point? Great questions. So those are some of the guiding questions. Specifics and storytelling is what I'm interested in. My name is Michael Schenk. I'm with the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance. We're a small global consortium of cities committed to the most ambitious goal setting in cities. So 100% greenhouse gas emission reduction, 0 waste, 100% renewable energy. I encourage my cities, just a quick anecdote on the storytelling front, I encourage my cities not to use the word carbon neutrality or the words carbon neutrality or the words net zero, because the public's not using them. And it's really hard to rally the public behind, what do we want? Carbon neutrality. When do we want it now? And even net zero and all the neutrality language is very difficult for the public and policymakers to rally around. So I'm bringing that up as an analogy because in the circular economy space, what language are we going to use? Is it circular economy? Is it other language? Hopefully we get into some of that today. Why cities? I think we all know this. Biggest CO2 footprint happening in cities. Biggest energy use happening in cities by 2050. Majority of the world, actually the majority of the world is already in cities, but a bigger majority, 75% will be in cities. Managing that migration and transition and heavy footprint, heavy energy use is going to be essential to our survival. So that's why we're talking about cities and industry today. A couple of quick news items this week that I found interesting because I'm constantly checking the news, because how do we locate this conversation which could be academic, report-based, a little esoteric, into the world of news. 3 things that I was interested in. I did a quick Google search on circular economy, so see what popped up. One, the EU Commission just released a report saying that their 2015 goal setting around circular economy is well on its way. The 54 actions cited in that 2015 report are either accomplished, achieved, or on their way to achievement, which is great. So the European Commission issued a report on that. Very pleased with the progress they're making. We have some European panelists here, so maybe they can speak to that, because I don't know it. I just saw it this week. I don't know the weeds of it. Another one is the MacArthur Foundation, already mentioned by Miranda, about their portal, but they have a whole meme, social media meme around it, #WearNext, spelled W-E-A-R, next, so that if you've got an old suit, an old backpack, an old piece of clothing, shoes, etc., you know where to drop it off to make sure it's reused again, recycled, etc. So that was launched this week, along with their online portal. And then third, I mentioned this before, and thank you for giving me one of these copies. Her new book is out, so I'm sure she'll talk to that. So there's exciting stuff happening, and obviously all week there will be events. And you saw, right over there, #making it circular. So if you do something with this conversation, I encourage you to take it outside these walls. I challenge you to engage in a conversation with someone who is not in this space, who doesn't work with an NGO affiliate or UN agency, etc., and test out the language. See what works, see what they gravitate towards. See how they engage the conversation, because that should guide us. The language the public is using and policymakers representing that public, that should guide us. We just need to be very careful about the storytelling we do around those specifics. Okay, so you see the speakers. We're going to go in that order. What I'm going to ask the speakers to do is give a couple-minute intro into their work. We'll go through everyone, and then we'll get into the policy, tech, business conversation with more questions for them, and then we'll open it up to the group. I'm actually, since we had a bit of a late start, I'm just going to jump in. I had a couple sentences on each panelist, but all of you have your smartphones or computers in front of you. I do encourage you to find out more about their incredible work. This is an amazing panel. Props to UNIDO for putting this together. Incredible experience on stage today. I'm not going to spend time reading their bios so that we can get into that experience. Hopefully that's okay with everyone. Ambassador Corrette, the floor is yours. Let's start with you.
Thank you, Michael. Well, one would feel a little bit uncomfortable sitting almost with only experts speaking about the circular economy and while 2 ambassadors sitting here. One would ask why an ambassador would take a challenge to speak on this panel. And let me say like this. I took a challenge because I feel that I'm a responsible citizen of my country, and that I believe that circular economy matters, and that wherever I live, and I live in the city of Ljubljana, which is a really fantastic example of circular economy, it is very important that we engage, as you said, as responsible citizens. Second, as a diplomat, as an ambassador here, I strongly believe that United Nations have a convening power to bring the countries of this world, not just on political issues, but bring them together to discuss and to compare notes and to give good practices on solutions, on specific solutions, as you said, Michael, specific. We need good practices, we need specific, and we need also industries. And the synergies that we can create here in United Nations are without any kind of limits, I would say. Why? Because United Nations, we have launched several policies. One of the, well, Agenda 2030 is one of the most important ones. The most important one, why? Because the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals, the climate agenda, the Paris Agreement, name whatever, is possible if we find synergies, if we use smartly and fastly circular economy, not just in our case, but in all the cases. And this is, I believe, why it's important to discuss this issue here. It's important also out of these walls, but to discuss it about, with the country representatives and to use specific examples in order to make a difference, because this organization was set up to make a difference. Thank you.
I love that challenge to make a difference. Thank you, Ambassador. And I know the sustainability work happening in your country is well recognized, and I was just even looking at some of the previous magazine pieces by National Geographic and others who have recognized your country's work towards sustainability. Who was here last fall in October for the ECOSOC conversation around circular economy and the SDGs? Few hands? Yes, yes, hold them proud, thank you, good, because we want to carry on this conversation in September. UNIDO is going to have another conversation on this. So this is a drumbeat that we're stirring up and we'll commit to over the years. This isn't just a one-off. We engaged it in ECOSOC last fall, and this September we're going to engage it again. So, Ambassador, thank you. Lindsay Clinton, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. And whatever coffee you had this morning, I would like to have some of that as well. Love the energy you're bringing. Morning, everybody. It's nice to see some familiar faces in the crowd. My name is Lindsay Clinton, and I'm a senior vice president at the New York City Economic Development Corporation. So we are responsible for strengthening neighborhoods and growing good jobs in New York City. I am on our industry initiatives team, so really thinking about how we can diversify New York City's economy and inject innovation into the economy. And so what does that actually look like in practice? It means thinking about what are the legacy industries in New York that we need to maintain, like fashion, like food, like manufacturing. What are the emerging industries that we need to drive forward, like blockchain, AR, VR, artificial intelligence, and then what are the strategic industries that we want to invest in? So right now we have a $500 million investment in life sciences. We have a $100 million investment in cybersecurity. So we're always thinking about how we can strengthen and diversify New York City's economy and develop good jobs. I specifically oversee our Smart and Sustainable Cities portfolio, which includes initiatives focused on the resiliency of small businesses throughout the 5 boroughs. We also have an Urban Tech NYC program that's been running for 4 or 5 years, where we're incubating companies that are solving urban challenges around mobility, waste management, energy efficiency. And then we have a program around advanced manufacturing called FutureWorks NYC, which is really thinking about how we can enable those people that are making things in New York City to continue to develop their skills and to start using some of the newest technologies like 3D printing. So my background is actually in both international development, so thinking about how to drive entrepreneurship in developing countries, particularly in Asia and Africa, but also as a sustainability consultant working with large corporations. So I think about this stuff all the time and in many different ways. I'm excited to have this job in New York City to start thinking about how we can apply the lessons that I've learned around innovation and sustainability to the way that we work in New York City. I think we're already kind of doing, spurring circular innovation through many of our programs like Urban Tech NYC and FutureWorks, but we're also dipping our toe in the water with new campaigns and new initiatives like this partnership that we're doing with the MacArthur Foundation that just launched this week, Make Fashion Circular, Wear Next. That's a partnership with EDC as well as the Department of Sanitation to help raise the awareness of consumers in New York City, citizens in New York City, about where their waste is going. So I think it's a really exciting time, particularly to be on the industry side of this conversation and think about what we can do to drive circularity here.
It's great. Thanks, Lindsay, and thanks to New York City's leadership. As many of you know, I'm sure, New York City, one of the first cities to adopt the SDGs, and so very much engaged, if you've not already worked with them, very much engaged at the UN on the SDG agenda, which is great leadership by the city. If you've not looked at their One NYC 350, 60-page document, it's worth a look because they're doing some really forward-thinking planning for the city there. Lindsay, thank you so much. Miranda, the floor is yours.
Of industry examples.
In this first round, since you've already talked,
Yeah.
feel free to do what you want with the floor. Most interested in having everyone kind of give a brief intro as to what they're doing. Okay. You've already mentioned it, so again, feel free to use these 2 minutes however you'd like.
I
it's been really inspiring to hear everyone else's comments so far, because each one makes me think of another example of something that's happening out there. So, like, great to hear about NYC having a sort of looking to encourage manufacturing in the city. I know that Milan is also doing something similar. They have a program called Manifattura Milano. All these things, all the examples are like, as I said at the beginning, it is a lot of things are going to have to move, and if you're very cynical, you can probably pick apart most examples for not being completely circular. But that is partly a reflection of the challenge, because not one initiative can be perfectly circular if the rest of the system is remaining linear. So that need for like lots of things to move is a really important part of it. But I'll just throw out a couple more examples, which I think are really exciting, just to make it a bit more specific. Does that work? There's an innovator company in London who are working with, I thought of it actually with regards to these bottles. They are trying to work it out of seaweed material. Now, I don't think they've got quite to the stage of being able to like have the water encased in the seaweed material like this, but what they have discovered with their innovation is that the water comes in these sort of blobs, which is perfect for, I don't know if anyone in the room's ever run a marathon or half marathon or ultra, whatever your limit is, but there's an awful lot of plastic waste if you have one, because at every water station everyone picks up a plastic glass and then it gets thrown on the floor and crushed and so on and so forth. So little innovations like that, like using those sort of water globules that you just pop in your mouth. You don't taste the seaweed, it's delicious. That was one example that sprung to mind. But also like the need for it to be really easy for consumers. There are, and when you said like talking to the consumers, of course there's a spectrum. There are some people who are never going to be excited about this agenda. It's always going to be about convenience first. And then you'll have that section of the society that will, even if it's less convenient, will probably make the move because they're more driven by the value than necessarily the convenience. But I love it. I love, there's an example both in the US and in the UK of organizations trying to change the plastic. So you can still use plastic. It's not that it's necessarily a bad material. It's got very valuable properties, but it's that you can't have it leaking the way it does currently. So I don't mean the water leaking, but leaking into the wider system. So like my washing liquid at home, I bought one plastic container from them, but now when it runs out, I send off the sachet in the post. It's designed to fit perfectly in the post box, goes back to the company, and I get a sachet back because they realize that most of the liquid is water, and there was no need for that water to be transported the whole time, so they just got the concentrate. I get the small sachet of concentrate back through my post box. It's very convenient. I never even had to go to the shop. I just put it into the bottle, fill it up with the tap water, and there we go. I've got my what I need, which is the washing liquid. I don't really need the plastic bottle. I just keep the same one going over and over again. So just small innovation examples which together, bit by bit, will help to change the system, but they do all need to scale. And there are examples of big companies also working. There's one of a carpet company who, I think in the previous age, which was mentioned before, like there was this bit of a desire for things to get ever more complex, and so they developed their carpets to the stage where there were like 60 different materials in them, and there was no chance in ever of recovering those materials. And having been inspired by circular economy within this very large company, they set up a innovation unit. So there's a sort of parallel between small innovation in cities and also within big industry, like set up a specific unit, give it the space to innovate, be unconstrained by other standard practices in the business, and they produced a carpet now that has like 3 materials in it, so that they can separate the backing from the top, so that can be reprocessed. So there's some 3 examples for you.
Excellent. Thanks, Miranda. Couple quick clarifying questions. So you called it water. What are those little things?
They're blobs of water.
Blobs.
Yeah.
Is that the official term?
No, probably
no. Okay.
not.
Okay. Another question. The website that you referred to in your initial presentation,
Yep.
what is that? The URL, the exact URL, do you know?
Oh my God, it's long, but we can send it to everyone afterwards.
We can send it to everyone
Yeah.
afterwards. Okay.
If you put Circular Economy in Cities, MacArthur Foundation, you'll get it.
You'll find it. Great. And then for this group, if they want to know about #WhereNext, what do they do? Do they...
So Lindsay can also speak to this, I guess, but my understanding, and correct me where I go wrong, is that the city, together with us, has worked with a large number of retail companies in New York. And the thing is, like, when I don't want this anymore, but it's actually still wearable, like, the problem is I don't really know what to do with it, and that's how so much stuff ends up in the trash. So it's a really simple website that I think marks out exactly where you take things, so that, again, that convenience for you as the individual is met, and then it's back to the producers to try, and this is hard, it's not all solved yet, but for them to try and figure out how to reclaim and repurpose the materials that are coming back to them.
So yeah, quickly, I think a lot of New Yorkers don't realize that there are over 1,000 refashion bins across New York City in residential buildings and some academic institutions, and those are provided by the Department of Sanitation. And if you don't have one in your building and your building has more than 10 units, then you can request one. So many of these already exist, but there are thousands more that could be put out there into buildings so that DSNY can collect more of your textiles and then give them to either Housing Works or the Salvation Army or other recycling companies that can then find onward market opportunities for them. So there is an interactive map that you can check out on the Department of Sanitation's website, and that will point you to those existing refashion bins as well as some of the retailer partners like Gap, Banana Republic, ASOS, Athleta, et cetera, who are working on this with us as well in New York.
So if you want to request one for your building, go to Department of Sanitation
Department of
site,
Sanitation's website.
and you'll be able to request it
Yep.
there. Great. Thank you. Let's go to Brian first, based on the order. I was like, oh, DJ, yeah. Brian, floor is yours.
Thanks, Michael. Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Matuszewski. I work for a company called TerraCycle, specifically for a new project called Loop. We are a company that has been around for about 17 years with really our sole mission focused exclusively on truly eliminating the idea of waste. There's really 3 buckets of activities that TerraCycle engages in with fulfilling that mission. One bucket of activities is really focusing on making everything in this world recyclable. There's oftentimes a misconception that only certain things can be recycled, but the reality is everything can technically be recycled, and TerraCycle makes that happen with our partners, which include major consumer product good companies, retailers, as well as city governments. So we specialize in these hard to recycle waste streams. So think of things such as cigarette butts, flexible packaging for your snacks, even used diapers. We engineer the collection and solution systems for these hard to recycle waste streams and give all of these waste streams that typically land in a landfill, give them a new life. So that's bucket 1. Bucket 2 of activities that TerraCycle engages in is making everything from waste. We do this in a multitude of ways. We manage over 200 waste streams that typically are discarded to landfill, like I mentioned. One example of how we make things out of waste is we partner with consumer product good companies, Procter & Gamble being one of them, where we've actually engaged hundreds of NGOs across the world to help collect beach plastic waste and use that material to recycle that into basically pellets that can be used as raw material to manufacture new shampoo bottles. So really, taking a bit more of a circular approach, tapping into existing waste streams and engineering and developing new products. The third bucket of activities that TerraCycle engages in is truly eliminating the concept of waste. And we're doing this with Loop, which is the project that I'm intimately involved in at the moment, working as the company's global head of brand partnerships. Loop is a circular shopping platform that offers consumers the ability to buy branded consumer goods in beautiful, durable, reusable packaging. So if any of you are familiar with the milkman concept, it's basically that, where you have a durable package, it's securitized by deposit, and you as a consumer have the opportunity to buy your products. These products can be in the food and beverage space, personal care, We've got about 250 SKUs, different products on the platform today, where consumers order their goods. They all arrive in this beautiful, durable, reusable packaging. The products, the packaging is maintained ownership by the brand, by the manufacturers. So we're essentially transferring ownership of packaging away from consumers back to the manufacturer, just like the milkman did 50, 60 years ago when that concept was more popular, and really modernizing that. And from a consumer's perspective, after you order your goods, these goods arrive to you at your doorstep via traditional e-commerce models. When you're done using your product, you place your empty back in the tote. Our logistics partners pick it up, we clean it, we sanitize it, and we send it back to the brand for refilling before it's redistributed. So that's the initiative I'm focused on, and looking forward to speaking more about it.
Thanks, Brian. So in thinking about storytelling, we could have some fun with those used diapers. If you've seen Bill Gates, I'm serious, like how do we get the public's attention, even policymakers' attention? And used diapers, we could have so much fun with them. When Bill Gates drank water that 5 minutes before was urine and feces, that got global attention. Incredible press coverage of that event. He was investing in the technology to purify what was once urine and feces, and now is water, and he drank it. Used diapers, we could have a lot of fun with that. I'm just imagining the poster. I live up in Vermont. I was asked by Lindsay what coffee I was drinking. This is just water from Vermont, but I think the air is fresher, cleaner up there, maybe. So maybe I'm getting some of that good oxygen intake up in Vermont. But up in Vermont, I run a rescue farm for horses, and what's interesting about the horse poop is that if you've seen horse poop, mushrooms tend to grow out of horse poop, and so I have a lot of mushrooms. Turns out, and I've mentioned this before, but there weren't many people who came in October, as many here, so I think I can say it again. But out of the horse poop come mushrooms that help fight superbugs. So in this post-antibiotic era, what are we going to turn to? My horses, because they're pooping incredible mushrooms that can help fight superbugs. Anyway, just some really fun examples of how we engage the public, and I think used diapers could be a lot of fun. I want to work with Brian on that. All right, last introduction. Dita, floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much to UNIDO for having me and all the partners. It's truly an honor to be able to share our experiences as a Danish business built on the principles of circular economy. So in a second, I'll dive more into how it is that we've actually gone about and created circular innovations and taken them to commercial scale at market. But if you allow me to take a little detour, the way we see the world is that we imagine a world without resource scarcity, without waste, and where climate and planet and people are truly thriving together. And we imagine that world to be real. Because even though we right now see that industrialization has brought so many great things for us all to enjoy and live and create a prosperous life, we also see that it has brought tremendous stress to our climate. But we believe that with circular economy as a tool, and by designing our materials, our products, our systems, and our business models through circular economy, we can really change that and make business and climate be prerequisites. So how we go about it is really through collaboration. So Linear Group consists of 3 companies, an architectural firm, a production company producing materials out of waste, and Linear TCV, a strategic and innovation hub where we take waste from outside the built environment and turn it back into materials, where we strategize with companies and our internal companies as well on how to actually ensure that not only is it a good idea and a good invention, it is actually an innovation that can be taken to market and that people are willing to pay the price for. So in short, ensuring that our solutions are competitive on price, quality, on aesthetics, because we believe that without that we simply won't be able to scale it up to the necessary scale that it needs to have in order for us to mitigate climate change and truly unlock the potential of circular economy for people as well as for planet. So a few examples on how we do it. There's been a lot of talk about textiles already. One of the things that we have is working with industry outside the built environment, but also with the waste managers on the textiles that right now the Salvation Army or etc. does not want, that it's actually just being burned and landfilled, which is unfortunately quite too much. We take that and we turn it into isolation materials as well as acoustic panels. So we put them into the built environment back again. So taking a problem from outside the built environment and turning it into a solution in the built environment, thus helping towards the decarbonization of buildings, but also using the buildings as material banks, essentially, so that when we get further with the technological development, we can actually, which we are quite close to, but can make textile back into textile, then we can actually take that out of the buildings again. Another example is one of our building sites, so we also create buildings. In Copenhagen, we have something called the resource rows, which is just about finished. There will soon be quite a lot of people moving into those resource rows. But what we did there is look at what are the societal problems that we're facing. One of them being due to urbanization. First of all, we have these desolate areas with desolate buildings that are not being demolished because there's no financial incentive to them for them to be demolished. So you just get these almost ghost towns that just sort of deteriorate more and more, and who really needs for these buildings to be demolished, but there is no one with the financial incentive to do it. So we take bricks from those parts of the country and reutilize them in our buildings. So thus gaining, again, the decarbonization of the building, but also gaining a huge advantage for the areas that needs to prosper in a new way and needs those buildings to be demolished. We get cultural heritage for new parts of the city that are very much lacking any sort of cultural history. And last but not least, and I know Michael also stressed this earlier, but we get local job creation, because it's free for us to get the material, but it takes jobs to make sure that they are demolished in the right way, and that they are upcycled so that we can reuse them in a beautiful way in the new building. Another example from this sort of urbanization into built environment, in that development we also took, so the metro is growing in Copenhagen, so that means that they have a tremendous amount of waste in that regard. So we reuse their concrete in our buildings. We also they had several hundred tons of really, really high quality wood. For them, it was used to transport steel pipes up through Europe for the building of the metro, which meant as soon as it was in Copenhagen, it actually had no use for them anymore. So it became waste that they actually had to pay a tariff to get rid of. Instead, they worked with us, and we turned it into a beautiful, beautiful building material for our sites as well. So there's lots and lots of opportunities for that. One last example also from the city perspective is how we work with both public and private developers to really map the materials that are available. So recently we did one in Oslo, in Norway, where it's called Lille Akkerbyen, and it's 12,000 square feet, so it's some, but it's not a great deal, and mapped what are all of these buildings that are here. It was all commercial buildings that needed to be turned into residentials. And normally how you go about that is you just tear everything down. You just, drive in a bulldozer and you go through it all. Instead, what they asked us to do is really map what are the materials you have here and what could they be turned into from a technological point of view, from a design point of view, and from a business point of view. And so rather than just demolishing everything, they now know that they have almost materials worth of 200 million Norwegian kroners, and they can actually reutilize them. And again, instead of going out to buy new materials, they can actually hire local skilled workers to help them turn all of that building material back into the materials that they need for the new buildings. So 3 examples of how we've worked with circular economy and really enabling from vision to reality and tangible results, all through partnerships.
Thank you. And what's your elevator pitch on this book? Why should people get it?
Because it is essentially the guide to how to future-proof business, buildings, and planet.
Lots
And you
of
can-
really
yeah.
great graphs and pictures. It's very user-friendly. I saw it earlier.
At changemakersguidetothefuture.com.
Excellent. I want to note two quick, interesting approaches, one from Dita and one from Miranda. Miranda was, in a keto fashion, naming the criticism that might come your way as you engage this work, naming it and transforming that conversation, which I love. That's one approach. And then Dita gave another approach, which is like positive vision. This is what we want. This is what we think is positive. With conviction, she said it. So as we engage this work, as we storytell around specifics, two different, very complementary approaches, naming the criticism before they can name it themselves, the critics, and transforming the conversation in a keto fashion for those of you who have studied martial arts, and then also painting a positive vision with conviction so that they can't poke holes in it. Okay, so we were going to go through those three layers, policy, tech, biz. As I mentioned, we had many questions in each of those layers. We don't have time for that, so I'm going to popcorn a bit, taking one from each section, just so that we get through a diversity of conversation before we turn to Q&A. And hopefully that's okay with the organizers. I see the looks from the organizers like, I can't believe he's doing that. He's not doing it. But hopefully we'll get to as rich a conversation, but I'm just very mindful of time. I do want to start with the ambassador. So on the policy front, how do you do it? We'd love to hear about some specific policies and initiatives that are making your country so sustainable. So anything specific you have for the public or private sector, we'd love to hear it. Ambassador, over to you.
Thank you. You know, we have to speak very highly about ourselves. So I'm very pleased that National Geographic spoke very highly about our country, ranking us as the most sustainable tourist destination in the world. That speaks for itself. But let me say, you were speaking, Michael, about need to reach out to the people. When my government started to implement Agenda 2030, we came out with, let's say, an idea that we implemented together with OECD. Why don't we go beyond that? Why don't we ask people what kind of country they want to live in? So we had a huge consultation with private sector, with NGOs, with different groups of people, different age, about the vision of Slovenia for 2050. In order to implement 2030, you have to look forward to 2050. So the government, after really lengthy and thorough consultation with the public and the experts, prepared the vision for Slovenia 2050. And in that vision for Slovenia 2050, it was very clear that green environment, innovative, inclusive environment is something, and country is something that the citizens want. So this is, let's say, the overture to the need to have policies in place from transition from the linear economy to the circular economy. So we have prepared basic papers like Development Strategy 2030, Smart Specialization Strategy. We are working on Climate Strategy and National Energy and Climate Plan. It means including the circular economy. We have launched the Partnership for Slovenia Green Economy project in 2016. We had 12 regional consultations involving about 3,000 partners. But Slovenia is 2 million people, so 3,000 partners is a huge. And of course, we prepared a roadmap towards a circular economy that was launched in May 2018. The roadmap has 4 priorities areas: food system, forest-based value chains, manufacturing industry, and mobility. What is, of course, the roadmap is also based on so-called circular triangle. So companies, private sector, well, economy, public sector, and of course, people. This is very, very important. Let me also say that we have set up a kind of implementing tools for that, and one of them is a network for transition to circular economy. that is an innovation cluster composed of government agencies, businesses, chambers, over 40 private companies, 16 research institutes, cities, and civil society organizations. What is important, let me just 2 stories or 3 stories to tell about the innovations. One innovation in the area of using the most dangerous waste for the purpose of environment. We have a technology in Slovenia that is still the only one in the world, developed in Slovenia, that uses the sludge from the water treatment plant, which is, you know, it's unusable. They use sludge, and they use combination of ashes from the the coal plant.
Right.
These, again, 2 most dangerous and 2 most toxic waste materials. With the technology, they use it to produce bricks, and those bricks can be used for the river, stream water banks or whatever, and they have a capacity to take heavy metals out of the water. So from 2 most dangerous, non-recyclable in the world waste materials, they created something that is even taking, so this is one. The second is, we have a huge problem with oil, split of oil and pollution, you know, in rivers or in the sea. In Mexico Bay, you know what kind of a catastrophe. To fight with that, we use chemicals. We use another poison. We have a technology in Slovenia that uses poplar seeds. Poplar seeds is a waste. Wherever, you know, there are huge poplar seed trees, there is a huge waste because it's all this white thing that is flying around in the spring. And there are areas in some countries that are huge because they planted the trees in order in the swamps, in order to dry the area. So these poplar seeds, treated with nanotechnology, they create a kind of cushions that they use for to take out the oil that is wherever in rivers or in the sea. The point of that is that, of course, those cushions you can burn somewhere, but the point is that you can squeeze it and you can reuse it. These are not so nice things, but the third is very nice one. I know Michael was speaking at the second committee about that he had difficulty to find a company or say producing sustainable clothing. I have a great news for you, Michael. It's a pity that we did not went or we did not have an event like this at the Fashion Week last week or 2 weeks ago here in New York, because there is a Slovenian designer, a Slovenian young lady called Benedete, what is her name? Matea, that created a fashion line, and she made it to the New York Fashion Week. A fashion line using the apple peels, pineapple peels, completely non-animal whatever resources, recycling again a waste that could be used for that. And now she's launching a new line which is going to invite the public in to challenge the plastic, to reuse the plastic for the fashion, whatever, but she's going to do it online. So she's inviting other, people that of ideas or innovations, how to blend in and to do something good. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I was referencing specifically suits. For a while, it was hard to find a sustainable suit made in the U.S., union, wages, wool, fabric, etc. I happen to be wearing one that's made in Ohio, and it's wool and union wages associated with it. So in the formal wear, especially for men, it's been a while to get sustainability really in that space, but now we're finally moving in that space. I want to do a quick popcorn with Brian, Lindsay, and Dita, if you will oblige me, on automation, blockchain, AI. You've already mentioned AI, Lindsay, and then all things construction. So again, all things. Yeah, no, just a few things. If you're thinking about takeaways in any of these spaces and interested in diving deeper, drilling down further, or carrying some of these takeaways into your partner affiliates, hometowns, cities, etc., I would encourage you to do that, and panelists, I would encourage you to offer it up in a way that we could take it away. So I'm the chair of the planning commission in my town in Brandon, and so I'm constantly thinking about how we can integrate some of these things in Brandon as I work with my global cities to do so. And I want to mention one other thing that the ambassador did, which I think is really important here, is when she talked about envisioning what Slovenia will look like in 2050, how do we paint that vision? I was just in Shanghai for work, and they have an urban, if you've ever been to Shanghai's urban planning exhibition hall, they've put a lot of money into envisioning the future of Shanghai. They've already done a lot of work around mass transit and managing waste and geothermal, etc. But you go into that 5-story exhibition hall and you have all kinds of interactive 3D experiences to let you know what Shanghai will look like in 10 years, 20 years. And that's so important as I think about planning in my town in Brandon, Vermont, as chair of the Planning Commission. How do I communicate to people the benefits of infill development, for example, and the ROI that's there? And so as we think about automation in manufacturing, as we think about AI and blockchain, as we think about the new future in construction, how do we envision that for people, and can we use, obviously it's expensive to do animation and 3D, et cetera, but it's really important to help paint a picture of what the possible looks like. Okay, Brian, automation in manufacturing. We'll go to Lindsay around AI and blockchain, if that's okay, and then to you around construction.
Yeah, so, with taking Loop as an example, as I mentioned earlier, we're in the business of selling consumer goods in durable, reusable packaging. With that system, we have a pretty complex supply chain that needs to support that system, including distribution centers, cleaning facilities, being able to take back product to disassemble the product, reassemble the product so we can leverage those existing resources and send them back to the consumer. So, obviously with automation, that will lessen our operational cost, which will be, very important to the success of Loop and, our ability to make this, a sound business economic model. So we're, very enthusiastic about, tapping into, advances in automation, AI, tapping into, autonomous vehicles, which will help lessen eventually our distribution costs from a shipping standpoint. The more efficiency that we can drive in our supply chain, the better it will be for the business, the better pricing consumers will be able to get, and that's basically where I stand from a Loop TerraCycle standpoint.
And if you want to find out more about Brian's work, just Google his name. There's so many videos. You've done so many videos, like storytelling some of this stuff. So he's got a lot online that I highly encourage you to watch. Thank you, Brian.
Sure.
Lindsay? Great. Yeah. So blockchain, artificial intelligence, machine learning, 3D printing, all of these emerging technologies, I think, are the key enablers to making the circular economy actually come to fruition. So blockchain specifically kind of allows us to know more, have more information about the materials that are out there in the world. And then artificial intelligence and machine learning, they're enabling us to understand the supply and demand of these materials and to then connect supply and demand so that you can create markets. There's an amazing paper on this that Cisco has put out within the last couple of months that really talks about the promise of machine learning for the circular economy, so I strongly recommend that you take a look at it. I think from New York City's perspective, we are investing in these technologies in the sense of wanting to make sure that the public in New York, they understand what blockchain is and what it can be used for, and circular economy is just one of those applications. But in January, we started something called the Blockchain Center, which is in Manhattan around the Flatiron, and they offer regular programming open to the public so that you can kind of learn more about all the different uses of blockchain. And we'll be making an announcement soon about artificial intelligence. But again, that's something that we can layer on a circular economy lens when we think about AI. We are soon going to be a knowledge partner on something called Connect Fashion, which is launching in April, which specifically brings together blockchain and fashion and looks at how we can create a unique digital identity for any piece of apparel so that it almost has both a birth certificate and an environmental ID so that you can know no matter where in the supply chain you are, when you run into a t-shirt, for example, you could use that digital ID to understand what are the materials that were used to make this and what should we do with this shirt, how long has it been worn, how can we get it into reuse, et cetera. And so it's a year-long pilot project that we're doing in partnership with quite a few other partners, including H&M and Microsoft. I think SAP is part of it. But look it up. It's called Connect Fashion, and we're excited to kind of learn through that initiative and hopefully other initiatives like it in the future.
Thanks, Lindsay. Dita.
So it's a dangerous task to give me to talk about circularity in the built environment and expect it to be a few minutes, because I could literally talk for hours. But the reason why the built environment is of such a great interest to me is because, first of all, it's such a huge, huge part of the problem. If you look at emissions, if you look at resource use, if you look at land scarcity, it's such a great part of the problem. It is such a conservative industry, and nonetheless, there is such a great potential. So really, it's about if we actually make it in the built environment. First of all, there's a lot of great direct effects of lessening the negative impact of the built environment, but it's also a fantastic case to bring to other industries. So one of the consequences that has is that we very much, from a strategic perspective, focus on working with commercial developers. So normally you'd have a lot of similarities where you would look maybe towards foundations or public sector players when you created your first buildings, but it's been important for us to really go into this sort of look at it from a market perspective and make sure that the people that we partner up with is people that will make the rest of the market listen, so that we can really have a catalytic effect and really highlight that it is possible to do circular economy without compromising on price, quality, and aesthetics. The other part is really going to other industries, highlighting that the built environment can serve as an inspiration and be applied elsewhere, but also that the built environment can actually, and what we believe is, if we are to solve the problems in the built environment, we need to break down the barriers between sectors and look at not only lessening the negative impact of the built environment, but really using the built environment as a medium for societal sustainability, so taking problems from elsewhere and using the built environment to solve it. And you can check, I know the UNDP recently did an article on one of our new buildings. It's going to be 35,000 square meters in Copenhagen as well. It's called the UN Village, simply because we took the challenge of really what does it look like if the built environment, if a city perspective, are to solve each and every one of the UN development goals. Some of it is directly related to the building, some of it is creating jobs through the building process, some of it is building community, new types of food, new types of production, but everything is really happening within those 35,000 square meters of the UN Village.